Back to the party system. So again, this is very much about the individual because of the electoral process, the electoral system they have in place. And what you have is frequent party hopping. You don't need a party leader's approval to run as a party member. You can run as an individual from that party. You can get on the party list, or you can run as an individual. But what this means is there's no need for party loyalty. You can just go off and do it on your own. In the 2003 elections, you had 19 parties in the legislature. And this forced the president to do a lot of bargaining, but it was still hard to get things done. So again, keep in mind, we've got a potentially powerful president, but really hamstrung by the legislative process and the electoral institutions that exist. So very fluid party identification. Here are some of the larger parties. The Democrats, they were previously the Liberal Front Party, are the largest socially and fiscally conservative party, pro-market, pro-business. In 2006, they got around 11% of the vote. In 2010, they got just over 8% of the vote. The Brazilian Democratic Movement Party and the Brazilian Social Democracy Party are centrist parties, which means that they had this sort of mix of free market conservatives, but also social democrats. So put them together and see what you get. In 2006, they got 14.5% and 13.5% respectively. So in 2010, they got 15% and 10% respectively. So they do relatively well. And then the Workers' Party is the largest, and it dominates the left. This is Lula da Silva's party. It was initially a union-based party, and then it came to sort of represent the downtrodden more generally. So if you're representing just the union population, you're representing workers. Well, what about all the people who don't have jobs? And it's not a particularly class-based society, so that makes it more difficult to represent just the unions too. 2006, they got 15% of the vote. In 2010, they got 17% of the vote. So they are the largest of all of these by a smidgen. Smidgen. What a horrible word. By a bit. But again, given the party system, it's not a surprise that you're going to find lots of other parties. You've got a plethora: the Party of Retirees, the Green Party, the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, the Liberal Party, the Humanist Party, the Labor Party, Christian Labor Party, etc., etc., etc. So, very important to understand that the party system, again, the largest party got 17% in the 2010 elections. That's not a huge showing. Finally, we moved into civil society. There's been lots of civil society activity since the 1980s. Not a surprise when you look at the other cases we've looked at, because it rose as you have economic problems and an opposition to the military regime. And then it continues to rise when you've got a very liberal constitution. People take advantage of this. Important to keep in mind is the role of the church. And the role of the church in lots of authoritarian countries has been traditionally very important. And so they played a big role in the anti-military regime mobilization. This is known as liberation theology. And the Brazilians were actually involved in the construction of this. Teach the poor people how to make their lives better. Organize locally. Stand out for political and social justice. And so the church often became a place that allowed for these organizations that might otherwise be cracked down on. But you meet in the church and you're usually sort of left alone. The church is one of the things that helped bring down communism. In Poland, the church was one of the things that united the people and gave them a literally political space. So the largest social movement in Brazil is the Landless workers movement. These are peasants who are in favor of land reform, and they've organized land seizures, and they've got around 1.5 million members. And they work through a variety of techniques, and they spring from liberation theology. This includes education. Tell people what rights they have. They claim to have taught more than 50,000 people how to read and write in the process of their mobilization. The landlords are supported by the police and the courts, which have repressed many of these movements, well, especially organized seizures. They've been targeted by violence, but they've also engaged in violence. And this social movement was successful in getting Cardoso to do major redistribution. But it's still one that stands out. And one of the reasons it stands out is it comes back to the high levels of inequality in Brazil. 1.6% of the landowners control roughly half of the land, 47%, on which crops can actually be grown. Remember, a lot of the land in Brazil, of course, is the Amazon rainforest. You're not going to grow a lot of stuff there. Although one of the major environmental issues, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, is cutting down of the rainforest in order to expand agriculture. Now, going back to the Gini coefficient, just 3% of the population owns 2/3 of all the arable land in the country, which is going to lead to inequality. Also, the major neoliberal reforms. God, I can't talk. It sucks. You can't even see me make funny faces. The major neoliberal reforms since 1995, including privatization of energy, telecom, the liberalization of foreign direct investment, have fueled these high levels of inequality. Inequality has been gradually falling off over the past several years, though, so maybe Brazil is on the upturn. So several years ago, for example, the richest 20% in Brazil had 64% of the income. The poorest 20% accounted for 2% of the income. Now the richest 20% account for 58% of the income, so down from 64, and the lowest 20% account for 3% of the national income, up 1%. So extreme inequality, potentially facing a trend away from this. Thanks likely in part to the fact that you've got a workers' party that took power. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the political economy. In the 1960s and 1970s, you had the standard import substitution model, just like we saw in where? Mexico, yeah. India, yeah. Imports were limited, the currency was controlled, credit was closely regulated, and the state operated certain economic sectors. But the military regime also borrowed way too much money. And so this leads to a rising debt, which has only gotten worse over time. Now it's about 1/3 of the GDP. And so, of course, when a populist administration comes in, Lula da Silva in 2002, people fear that he's not going to respect his commitments. But again, he has. He moderated since taking office. Why do you think he moderated? Oh, that's actually a great question. I might ask that. Why do you think he moderated? I haven't figured out which questions I'm going to put up now, but that would be a good one to put up. So I'll probably come up with a different question because I sort of want to explore that with you. So one more time, why do you think he moderated? Pause, think. Why would he moderate? Think about a strong president like this. Oh, right, he's not so strong after all, is he? He lacks strong control over the legislature. That could be part of it. What else might hinder his strength? Oh, the world! Globalization! The effects of globalization on domestic politics. Neoliberal policies dominate despite even the ruling party's ideology, right? So things to keep in mind. I'm sure you can come up with some more. So think a little bit more about this. And finally, this is a really huge point that I need to bring up, which is that 2/3 of the workforce is in the informal sector. Half of workers don't contribute to Social Security because they have no regular job. And this is in part why you see such large social movements. Again, think about all the bad things that come out of the informal sector. They weaken the state and they weaken the workers. The workers lack protections. The state lacks this income. Taxation is around European levels, but people get very little in terms of the services for it, which also probably contributes to this disregard or distaste for democracy in Brazil. People support it, but they don't think it's necessarily the best system. So that wraps up our thing on Brazil, and look out for a discussion question.